The right to vote in free and fair elections is a key mechanism that preserves freedom and liberty in America. But in recent years, the integrity of our elections has come into question.
We need to be concerned about the integrity of our election system in America. If we don't have free elections, then we've lost our country.
We cannot let our elections be anything but transparent. It is at the very heart of freedom in a free society.
In recent polls, a majority of Republicans, almost a majority of Americans, believe that there was fraud in the last presidential election. So whether or not there is that impression that there was. And we're just now starting to see the evidence come forth of what really happened.
Many on the far left claim that election fraud is non-existent, but the evidence proves otherwise.
In Orange County, California in 2018, there were at least 250,000 ballots delivered after Election Day that turned that county completely Democrat, even though it had long been a Republican county. In South Texas, union goons were going door to door intimidating people, demanding they either surrender their ballots or they gave them ballots to fill out. They got caught, people were tried and convicted, and yet the mainstream media ignore this kind of intimidation that ballot harvesting provides.
Of course, there's the case of over 2,000 mules, as they're called, of taking a large number of ballots and stuffing them in ballot boxes in Georgia and Arizona and in Wisconsin, and it's on videotape. You know, what's the story with that? We need to get to the bottom of that. And then it seems state after state, they're uncovering through they're looking at the register of voters that there's dead voters. There are more registered than there are voters. There's all sorts of things that need to be fixed.
While these occurrences of election fraud don't necessarily delegitimize election results, it reveals the ultimate strategy of the radical left: to win elections by any means necessary.
The left has worked for years to undermine election integrity. They've been against voter ID laws. They've expanded early voting to where we don't have election day anymore. We have election month, or even more, election 6 weeks. They've encouraged mail-in balloting with no excuses, and they have pushed same-day registration. They relax all the standards that ensure election integrity.
I think there is legitimate concern about what happened in prior elections and the 2020 election, but I think the 2020 election is unique. It's a unicorn. It was held in the middle of a pandemic where politicians, either surreptitiously or trying to get it right, made changes to the election system to deal with the reality of a country that wasn't going to go to the polling places because they were afraid. And so they had to come up with a methodology in which people could express their vote.
Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many states drastically changed their procedures for the 2020 election, allowing mail-in voting, extending deadlines for ballots, and ignoring election laws already in place. This opened the door for potential fraud.
The difference between mail-in voting and absentee voting is huge. Absentee voting, you have to request a ballot. You have to show who you are, and this ensures that your vote is legal. Mail-in balloting, when they just send it to every address in their system, is rife for abuse. They counted ballots that weren't postmarked. They extended late counting for a week in some states. They just relaxed all the standards for identification on mail-in ballots. They cured ballots. That means election officials actually filled in information that the voters didn't bother doing. And those ballots should have been rejected, but they weren't.
In California, I think it was normally like maybe between 5 and 10% of these mail-in ballots get rejected, and the 2020 election is less than 1%. So the amount of scrutiny was certainly not there.
Another major issue stems from the chaos at our southern border.
There is a push right now by various progressives that are convinced that we want to bring in all sorts of people across the border. I live in the state of Texas, and I can tell you we're seeing just an enormous number of individuals, probably 2 million people this last year, crossing from Mexico into the United States. And I think the hope is that these might be future Democratic voters.
I think the plan is very clear on the Democratic side. Flood the nation with illegal aliens by the millions, get them hooked on welfare benefits, food stamps, rental assistance, you name it. Hold out a welcome mat for even more people to come in, and then naturalize them, turn them into citizens, and then have them vote for the very people giving them government largesse. I don't think it could be any clearer. They want to replace the American electorate with people coming over the border.
To have an effective voting system in the United States, we've got to have an effective immigration system. I mean, let's start there. When people come into the United States, what is the opportunity for them to become a citizen? What is their opportunity to be involved in the voting process?
To prevent illegal immigrants from voting in U.S. elections, many states have passed common sense voter ID laws.
Fortunately, many states are rushing to make their elections safer. Georgia's legislature passed a very common sense voting integrity law that just tightened procedures. And yet the press and the Democrats beat up on Georgia, said it was racist, Jim Crow 2.0, which is how Joe Biden put it. This whole charade that somehow voter ID and other election integrity safeguards are racist may play well in the mainstream press, but most Americans aren't buying it.
I think it's clear what's happening. When you had, I think Mr. Biden called it Jim Crow on steroids with Georgia's election law. And I remember I heard that, I read the bill myself. I said, I don't see anything in this bill that's the least bit racist. In fact, there's some areas where I think you're too lenient on allowing people to vote in some areas that you have to have voter integrity. If I have to have an identification to ride an airplane, to drive a car, don't you think it's important that you would know that when I say my name, Abraham Hamilton, I'm here to vote, that you know it's Abraham Hamilton? I mean, I think it's absolutely ridiculous. It's a clear push to liberalize election law, to allow people to do whatever they want.
Behind many of these endeavors to reform laws and influence elections is the radical billionaire George Soros. Starting in the early 90s, Soros began spending huge sums of money to influence major US elections.
The Clinton administration is at least where I say he has the first major involvement. He's very connected with Hillary Clinton. He was very connected to Bill Clinton. It's in the Bush era where he really started to kind of turn up the heat on how much money he's actually investing in these elections. There was one point he said that, I think it was versus Kerry, that he would be willing to spend his entire fortune trying to defeat Bush.
The Hungarian-born billionaire who contributed millions to the Democratic Party, but he also contributed to efforts to change the nature of elective offices. He spent a fortune to replace secretaries of state around the country, especially in key battleground states. He spent a fortune making sure district attorneys in major cities would be hard left Democrats.
Those who have traced Soros' spending says there's virtually no far-left project in America today that doesn't somehow have the fingerprints of George Soros on it.
I mean, he spent, I think it was $25 million into pushing mail-in voting, and the reason behind mail-in voting is kind of genius in that the left is in a situation where, you look at any poll and the youth are overwhelmingly left-wing, they're at the same time the least likely to actually get out and vote. So to fix that problem, and if you just mail it from a ballot, some kid who might not wait 20 minutes in line is going to go, okay, I can check a box. And it does open up the door to fraud. I mean, if you're a liberal parent and you've got 2 or 3 kids away at college, maybe you check those boxes.
Despite what we've seen in recent elections, it is still vitally important for Christians to exercise their right to vote.
What happened in 2020 was a good thing. It was a wake-up call to people that things are this bad, and if you do not act, America is over, and your children and grandchildren will suffer.
One of the most important elections is the election of 2022. This election, for people of faith, is vital that we see a change, because the direction of our culture, the direction of our economics, of our politics, of the world affairs, it's in chaos. And the war against Christians is at an all-time high. This election can turn things around. And so I'm encouraging people of faith to go out and vote, to actually make a difference in their community. And we're seeing this happen all over the nation.
People need to vote, even if they think the system is not perfect. We've never had a perfect system, but we have a God-given gift of self-governance here. This was new to the world. For centuries, we had kings and rulers and emperors, and not until the United States was born in 1776 did we say the people are the king. Christians of all people should realize that we've been given a great gift by God to be self-governing people. It's resulted in the freest, most prosperous nation in history. And to give that up and say, well, I don't like the system, so I'm not going to vote, is like turning down a precious gift. I think all Christians ought to vote, and they ought to vote their values. And if they don't, well, we see what happens when they don't.